Hi there, Shane and Caitlin here, and welcome to Science on the Table,
the podcast that covers all things South African science, where we take the tough stuff and break it down into bite-sized bits so you don't have to.
That's right, from soup to nuts. So let's lay it all out on the table.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated institutions or organizations. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, the content shared is for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. Some information may become outdated as new research emerges. Always consult primary sources or professionals for advice related to your field of interest. The hosts are not liable for any errors or omissions in the content, and listeners should critically evaluate the information presented.
Hi everybody, welcome to today's episode. Today we're very excited to welcome Dr. Chia onto the episode. She has a PhD, and that just means she's got the highest level of study or qualification in her field. Yeah, so she's got the title doctor. She's not a medical doctor, but she's a science doctor. But I'm going to hand it over to Chia. Welcome, Chia. I hope this is going to be a really exciting episode for you. We are certainly looking forward to it, and we are really excited to just inform people about what you've got to say today. So if you could maybe just elaborate on that, what your qualifications are, where you've studied, and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Hi everyone, I'm Chia. My background is in microbiology. I got my PhD in microbiology and biotechnology from Wits University in 2022. After that, I was a postdoc from 2022 until this year, Feb actually. In my postdoc, I was also in the field of microbiology, but it was looking at the microbiome of mosquitoes, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And currently, I'm a senior medical scientist at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, where I'm doing some Ebola research.
We are super excited to have you here, Chia. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, just for all the kids out there, can you just give us a little bit of an idea on how you get into the type of field that you're in? If anyone is interested in going into something like you're doing, what can the general public look at if they ever want to do this kind of study or this kind of degree? Where would one start?
Well, I basically have been at Wits this whole time. So I did a BSc, a Bachelor of Science at Wits University. And then after that, I did a BSc honors. And then I chose to major in microbiology and also genetics and developmental biology. After that, I stayed at Wits and I started a master's in microbiology, which I then later converted to a PhD because we realized we were doing some really interesting stuff that we wanted to carry on forward. So I think if you want to end up in research like this, definitely you would probably have to do a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences. You would probably need to at least have a master's. From there, it's pretty easy to get into this kind of research if you want to stay in research or academia, which is where you do research and you teach at a university. That I would say that would be the path, and that's the path I followed.
Thank you, Chia. I think that gives us a good idea of just how someone gets into the field and how they would actually get to the point of getting to do the research that you're going to talk about today. From what I believe, what you're going to talk about today, it obviously centers around malaria, but that was from your previous post, and that was the research that you were involved in, right?
Yes, that's correct, but it's very close to my heart. It was very exciting. It was a very exciting time.
And that's exactly why we've invited you to come and talk about it. So maybe we can start with the basics and just inform people what is malaria and how do people get it?
Okay, malaria is quite a serious disease. It's caused by a tiny, tiny parasite called Plasmodium. and it is a parasite that lives in the blood. People can get malaria when they are bitten by a female mosquito specifically, and these are generally Anopheles mosquitoes. It's just the species name of the mosquitoes, but it has to be a female mosquito because only female mosquitoes drink blood from humans. And what happens is when the mosquito has the parasite and they bite someone, they can transmit that parasite into the person, and then the person can get that parasite, which then results in them getting malaria. Something very interesting about this parasite is that it is not a bacteria, and it's not a virus either. It's not a fungi. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. It's a very cool, separate organism from a group called the protists. And so it's got a really complex life cycle because it lives in both the humans as well as the mosquitoes in order to complete its life cycle. And it's when it completes its cycle in the humans that's when we get sick from this parasite. So it's a very interesting little parasite.
Can I ask, do you know what the general situation is in South Africa in terms of cases? Are there areas that are endemic for malaria?
Yeah, so it's essentially where we border Mozambique and Zimbabwe. So it's Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the border of KZN. That's where we actually are endemic. A lot of people don't know that we do actually have malaria in South Africa. It's just on the edges, on the border, where we are very close to Mozambique, because Mozambique has millions of cases every year. So that's actually where we get a lot of our imported cases. People will go to Mozambique on holiday, get bitten there, come back to South Africa, and then they get sick here, and then that's how we record the cases here. Meanwhile, they actually got it in Mozambique.
Great. Just for the listeners, remember we've spoken in a previous episode about what endemic means for a certain disease, and that just means that it's quite common for that disease to be present in a certain area.
Okay, so now the question on everyone's lips is, why do mosquitoes spread malaria?
Well, the thing is, the mosquito doesn't know it's spreading malaria. It just happens to get infected by this parasite. And then when it feeds, okay, let's start off here. So the reason why a female mosquito needs blood is because they need the nutrients in the blood in order to produce eggs. So if a female mosquito does not drink blood from a human, they actually cannot lay eggs and produce offspring or babies. And so that's why they bite us. And it's just like a cool revolutionary thing where the parasite just happens to need to grow inside a mosquito as well as a human. So if the mosquito just happens to have this parasite, it's going to pass on to a human when it bites them and drinks their blood. And the parasite needs to actually be in the human to replicate and to make more of itself as well. So it's just that the parasite needs to complete its life cycle in both the mosquito and the human, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. That does make sense. You mentioned that mosquitoes need human blood to complete the cycle. Is that not applicable to animal blood?
So yes, mosquitoes don't just need human blood. It's blood from any animals, and there are specific species of mosquitoes that actually prefer blood from cattle, and they actually feed predominantly on cattle. So there are some vaccines that actually target the cattle to stop the spread of malaria instead of vaccinating humans. And when I was doing my postdoc, we actually had to rear or grow the mosquitoes over many generations to study them. And as I just said, female mosquitoes can only lay eggs if they drink blood, and we cannot give them human blood because it's an ethical issue. So we do actually artificially feed them through a membrane, and it's like warmed blood to replicate human blood, but it's actually cattle blood. And in other cases, we've discontinued that, but we used to actually put guinea pigs on top of the cages, and that's where the mosquitoes would get the blood from. But we've moved away from that because it's just more ethical to do the artificial cattle blood method. So yeah, it's essentially any blood for the mosquitoes, not just humans.
That's fascinating research, Chai. So on to the next point. I want you to briefly explain the project you were involved in. so the listeners can get an idea of what the project was about. How did you go about it? And yeah, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, so what my project was about was essentially looking at all the bacteria in the guts of the mosquitoes. You actually have to dissect the guts out of the mosquitoes, and you do that under a microscope. You zoom in on a microscope and you take forceps and you essentially pull the mosquitoes apart until you can see the gut. You take the guts out, and I mean, we processed it and you extract the DNA from that. So that's the genetic material from the guts. And then from there, we can actually find out what part of that DNA is bacteria DNA. And it's very cool because bacteria is so small, but we are able to identify bacteria and find exactly all the different kinds of bacteria that are present in the gut of the mosquito. And we actually also did that on the salivary glands, the mosquito, and also the reproductive organs of the mosquito. So I also looked at the ovaries of the mosquito. So that's all dissected under a microscope. And then you essentially look at the DNA through something called sequencing to identify exactly what kind of bacteria are in there.
That must be very fine work, and as exciting as it can be, I'm sure it's also not an easy task.
It wasn't easy, but it's really fun. I really enjoyed it. I always enjoyed working with a microscope. I just think it's really cool to see something that you can't see with your naked eye, but you can under the microscope. It's really, really cool. But a mosquito is very small, so the organs are even smaller.
So you've spoken about the gut bacteria, and the collection of the bacteria is called the microbiome. Can you just, if there's any more explanation that's needed, maybe elaborate on what a microbiome is? And we do know now that mosquitoes have a microbiome, and how does that generally look in terms of specifics, specific bacteria or specific bacterial species?
Yes, so the microbiome, as you said, is essentially what I was looking at. We're looking at all this collection of the tiny microorganisms, whether it's bacteria, viruses, or fungi, but I only looked at bacteria. And the reason why we're looking at the microbiome or the bacteria inside the gut of the mosquito is because just like humans, we have a microbiome that helps our gut digest, and it's also really important for our immune system. A lot of people don't know this, but your immune system, how you digest your food, and there's a lot of current research right now that says whether you have certain mental problems, how brave you are, even how likely you are to develop diabetes, it's all related to the gut bacteria. And so it's the same in a mosquito, where different bacteria play different role, whether it's for development or for the immune system, for a lot of physiological processes. It's really important for that mosquito. And so that's why we were so interested in looking at what kind of bacteria exists in the mosquito. So what we would do is we would look at what's in there naturally and then trigger something. So we would then put in a pollutant and see how that alters the bacteria. So from there, we can see what the function of the bacteria is. So we have a set where it's just naturally what we see, and then we have a set where we see, okay, what happens if we change this? What happens if we change the temperature? What happens if we add a pollutant to the water, etc.? And so that's how we check what bacteria is important for what. And to add on to that, there are certain bacteria in the mosquito that actually make them stronger in their immune system, and it actually is able to help them fight off the malaria parasite. And so we're also trying to find those bacteria so that we can figure out a way to use that bacteria to eliminate malaria transmission.
Can you please give us a little bit of a clearer relationship between this microbiome bacteria and the malaria?
Okay, so we have some bacteria. I can name a few. It's bacteria like Serratia, Azea, and Enterobacter. These naturally occur inside the gut of the bacteria. Okay, so there's two ways to do this. One is that you take a bacteria that naturally strengthens the immune system of the mosquito and helps it fight off.
So we can use these bacteria to tweak the gut of the mosquitoes.
And then it will help it strengthen its immune system, and then it can fight off the malaria parasite, which means there's no more parasite and no more malaria transmission. The second way is to take the bacteria that naturally exists in the mosquito. It's very important because if you now want to introduce a foreign bacteria, the mosquito might not like it. So we have to start from taking a bacteria that is already existing inside the gut of a mosquito. Once we identify a suitable bacteria that is naturally occurring in the mosquito, we can actually genetically modify them. So that's a technique where you change the DNA of the bacteria in a way to make them produce chemicals that can kill the malaria parasite. So you're essentially giving the bacteria weapons to kill off the malaria parasite. But that way is through genetically engineering. So you're essentially creating a genetically modified organism to put back into the mosquito. So those are currently the two ways that scientists can use bacteria to stop malaria.
On a practical note, how do scientists take these bacteria and put these helpful bacteria into mosquitoes? And are they added to the mosquito stomachs in certain concentrations so that they outcompete the beneficial bacteria, or how does that work?
Yes, that's a very good point, Shane. So currently a lot of this research is in the beginning stages where scientists are just screening for suitable bacteria, and where they have brought it to trials is you can actually feed them. Okay, I have said that the female mosquitoes drink blood, but when they are not needing the blood, so for the male mosquitoes, for example, they actually drink nectar from flowers. And females do too when they don't need to produce eggs. So before a female mosquito matures enough in order to lay eggs, for example, it also drinks nectar. So female and male mosquitoes drink nectar. And so we mimic that in the lab by giving them these cotton wool that's soaked with water and sugar. So it's like a sweet solution that they then go and they drink from. And so when you put the sugar water in, you can put some of the bacteria in the sugar water so that when they drink the sugar water, they will ingest the bacteria, whether it's the native existing bacteria or whether it's the modified bacteria, they can actually take it in. That way you don't have to inject anything in them or anything. They can just drink it like that. We have thought about, because a lot of how mosquitoes are caught outside in the wild and in the rural areas, a lot of people will make these traps to catch the mosquitoes, and the traps have baits, certain sweet baits. Sometimes it's just fruit, and so you can just essentially put the bacteria on these baits and the mosquitoes will take it in like that without having to force anything into them or down their throats.
So, Chia, we need to address something that's quite important, and that is for the everyday person who might not be scientifically inclined. People do get a little bit paranoid when we talk about altering anything that they would perceive to be natural. Can the alteration of the mosquito's microbiome lead to any kind of negative side effects or a new disease that might potentially pop up? Is it safe to do this?
Yes, I hear this question and we do get it a lot. But the thing is, we think that people are more likely to accept it because you're not genetically modifying the mosquito. You're modifying the bacteria. And even in the cases where we're not modifying the bacteria, we are changing the mosquito's microbiome to make them stronger, and stronger in a way that their immune system is stronger. That actually prevents them from getting a lot of parasites, not just the malaria parasite. So I do think it's very safe because you're not assisting the parasite in any way. You're actually helping the mosquito fight off the parasite. It's like when humans take supplements to make their immune system stronger, whether you take vitamin D or C or B. It's kind of like that. You're just strengthening the immune system so that the mosquito can fight it off. And in the case of the genetic modification, you are tweaking the bacteria to produce chemicals, and it's actually called anti-malarial peptides or anti-malarial proteins that fights off infection. So in both cases, we're just strengthening the immune system of the mosquito, and its genetic modification is very, very precise. It is not possible for the bacteria to produce anything else other than what we engineer it to produce. And so even if it produces more of it, it's just strengthening the mosquito's immune system. We're not altering the parasite in any way. We're not changing the mosquito itself in any way. We're just giving it a boost of its immune system. So I do think it's quite safe, and hopefully if we can communicate it the right way to the public, it would be accepted easily.
Thank you. I think everyone is going to sleep a little bit easier knowing that. I do have one follow-up question on that, Chai. If we do successfully treat these mosquitoes by altering their microbiome, is that something that can be genetically passed on to the next generation of offspring? Or is it something that's going to have to be treated with each new generation of mosquitoes? For our committed and avid listeners who have listen to our first episode where we discuss DNA and we talk about these traits that get passed on from the parent onto the offspring, we would just be interested to know, is it something that's going to require ongoing treatment, or will it be carried through then for the next generations?
That's actually a very, very good follow-up question. You're completely right. If we just take the gut and we tweak the gut, then yes, you would have to repeatedly feed them something to strengthen the immune system, like humans have to constantly take vitamins. But that's why in the beginning I said I also looked at the reproductive organs. So what we were trying to see is there bacteria that is found in the ovaries, for example, that is also in the gut? Which means that if we tweak the gut and it's also a bacteria that travels to the ovaries, then it does actually get passed on to the progeny, to the offspring, because it's in the ovaries, which means the eggs also have the bacteria. So when we were screening, what we were looking at is there something that is shared between the guts? So it's also the salivary glands, because the salivary glands is the first point of contact. When a mosquito bites someone, the salivary glands where they produce saliva is the first point of contact. And so sometimes when they ingest something, it goes through the salivary glands, then it goes to the midgut, and sometimes it even travels to the ovaries. So we were looking for bacteria that existed in all three of those organs, so that if it's in the ovaries and the midgut and the salivary glands, we can make sure that we just have to make sure that they take it in once and it goes to the ovaries where it can get passed on. And that's what we call vertical transmission of something, where it will get passed on vertically downwards from offspring to offspring to offspring. And then that way we just have to give them the bacteria once. So that's the ultimate idea.
Thank you for the extensive explanations, Chai. They're really informative, and thanks for breaking that down to a really understandable level. If you think about this project, what would be the next steps for scientists to do by working on this idea? Like just future directions and maybe implementation plans?
Yeah, so I only got to the stage of screening for the different bacteria and then altering the conditions and the environment around it to see what happens. The next step would actually be to create, we were calling it a library of the suitable bacteria. So we were going to kind of catalog the different bacteria and have essentially running stocks of them like cultures. What you can do with bacteria is you can grow them in a media, which is just like a liquid that has all the nutrients that the bacteria needs. You can grow the bacteria in that and you can spin them down, which is just essentially making like a very concentrated pellet of it, and you can freeze that down. So we were trying to do that, or we were going to keep them in glycerol to keep them for long term. And with that stock, then what you can do is do lots of different experiments with it. And the biggest one would be to actually get clearance to get mosquitoes that actually carry the parasites, and then try out the different bacteria that we thought was suitable and see if it really does stop the mosquito from transmitting malaria. So that would be, the concrete proof that this method can work. And if that does work, then it would be really amazing to then have large scale trials on this. And if it does become commercialized into a product, it would definitely be out of my hands, because that would be like a corporate thing. But I think what the product would look like is that it would be something that the mosquito can ingest. So it would be some kind of a trap with maybe a bait, or maybe just a bait, because you obviously don't want to trap the mosquito necessarily. You just want to have them ingest this bacteria and then go about their day and not be able to transmit malaria. And yeah, so like, we're not trying to make the mosquitoes go extinct. We're just trying to make them healthier, strengthen their immune system. But it's really funny, because a lot of people ask me, why don't you just get rid of the mosquitoes? Because they're so annoying when they bite you. But yeah, that's not the goal. We don't want to actually get rid of the mosquitoes. We just want to make sure they don't transmit malaria to humans anymore.
Can you see the parasites finding a way to work around that by infecting the hosts to just get a bit of a competitive advantage over the microbiome?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, these parasites are very smart. They are very adaptable. They can adapt to many situations. I mean, that's why the chemical insecticides don't work, is because they keep evading it. They keep developing resistance towards these chemicals. So it is possible that they can also somehow develop a resistance to this or evade this mechanism somehow. So what I think is that this method probably won't be the be all end all. It will probably be a complementary method to something that's more substantial. Currently, South Africa and Mozambique and all these malaria endemic countries, they are using chemical-based insecticides, spray insecticides, to get rid of the mosquitoes. But yeah, the mosquitoes do develop resistance. So I think eventually it would have to be something that is on multiple fronts. So when you think about getting rid of malaria, you can't just think about the mosquito. So you have to think about the human, the mosquito, and also the parasite. So this is only targeting the mosquito. You would have to implement this method together with something else that targets the human as well as the parasite. So all three has to happen at the same time in order to really eliminate malaria.
The majority of South Africans are quite practical people. So we're always looking for a home remedy. I mean, if you've got a pest, you can call out pest control and they can come and treat it for you. You know, it's a professional company. But there are usually home methods that we can, use to sort out said pest. Now, in an ideal world, I know that there are lots of developing countries who are, the majority of malaria is in developing countries in Africa. Do you see, if we have to eliminate finances as being an obstacle or access being an obstacle, do you ever see this kind of treatment becoming a DIY or a home treatment?
I mean, I guess it is possible. I'm just thinking out loud now, because I'm not quite sure how you can DIY getting the specific bacteria unless you can buy those stocks where on the shelf it says it is Serratia, this strain, and it will do this, and then you can bait it yourself. Maybe something like that could work. I've actually never thought about it. It's a very interesting idea. That would actually be quite cool, where we screen it for you already and we've modified it for you already in certain cases. And then we say, okay, this is this strain, it will do this. All you have to do is that. But I think if you want to DIY the whole thing from scratch, I don't think it's possible, because I wouldn't know how you could isolate the specific bacteria and ensure that it is the right one and will do the right thing.
So almost like a probiotic, but just for mosquitoes.
Yeah, it would be something like that, John. And it would probably be a cocktail of, a few different strains, a few different species. But yeah, very interesting to think about.
So, Jai, just to close off, I'd like to maybe ask a bit of a fun question, but what is something that is like surprising about mosquitoes or that you found surprising about studying mosquitoes that you didn't know before you got to know more about malaria and the vectors, which are the mosquitoes, because they help transmit the parasites?
What did surprise me was, I mean, this is very random, but I just thought they lived really long. Like, I don't know, I just didn't expect. I mean, the average lifespan is like 30 to 60 days, and I just thought that was really, really long. Like my PhD, I was actually doing moths, and like they don't even live as long as mosquitoes. So that was just a very random thing that surprised me. And sometimes when you change the environment, like if you give them a certain pollutant, they live even longer, which is problematic because in the real world, if they are in polluted water and they live longer, they can actually have more of a chance of transmitting malaria because, I mean, they stay alive longer.
How quickly do they procreate, like become more and produce offspring?
It's quite quick. So from my experience, I don't know what the actual average is. I was working on the species of mosquito called Anopheles funestus, and they actually have a longer life cycle than Anopheles arabiensis, for example, just as an example. And I would collect eggs on a Monday, and by about Thursday, they would have hatched. And then they kind of go into the next instar or the next life stage every like 3 to 4 days. And there's about 4 instars. So it's supposed to be like 10 days from the time they hatch till the time they pupae. I was seeing about 2 weeks. So yeah, so from eggs, then about 3 to 4 days, it's larvae. From larvae to adults is about another 14 days, 15 days. And then when they're adults, they can still live 30 to 60 days. So it's quite long.
That's fascinating. It's something you don't think about. I mean, we just see them.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah, I
common.
mean, you just assume they don't live that long because they're so small, but it's
And they get
actually
swatted.
quite long. Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite interesting. Like, this is something also that surprised me. I didn't know much about mosquitoes. I thought that all mosquitoes buzz, like they make that sound. But the ones I worked for made no noise at all. And they were brown. I thought all mosquitoes were like stripy, black and white. But the mosquitoes that transmit malaria are actually brown and they don't really buzz.
That's very interesting.
Keep your eyes open, kids. If you see a brown mosquito, you run.
Yeah.
Stripy ones you can make friends with, invite them to the tea
Yeah.
party. If they're brown, you run.
Yeah. And it's the black and white ones that make that classic annoying sound when you're trying to sleep. So that's also, yeah, very interesting.
I think I actually want to ask one more question, and it's about malaria eradication. Do you think that's a pipe dream, or would that be possible?
Look, the WHO, we were supposed to have eliminated it already, okay? And we keep postponing the deadline. We keep coming really, really, really close. What's really interesting is China was able to eradicate an outbreak of malaria in a year. And to get deemed that you've eradicated malaria, you have to be malaria free for a certain amount of time. I can't remember. I think you have to have 0 cases for 3 years to be able to get that standard that, okay, we don't have malaria. And China was able to do that. So I think what it comes down to is you need very strict policy. So the whole country has to come together. All the provinces have to come together and share the surveillance data, share what they have. What we have right now is all the provinces are not really talking to each other properly. And so if there's an outbreak in a certain province, the other provinces don't necessarily know. And then it spreads like that. So I think it's a regulation problem. I mean, we can have the best products. We can target it on all 3 fronts, the humans, the parasite, the mosquito. But it comes down to regulation and how well that is controlled, how well that is regulated for malaria to be eradicated. So I think because China is so strict and their government, has a lot of say and can implement a lot of strict rules. I mean, we saw in COVID with the lockdowns that they were implementing. Maybe that's the only way to really eradicate. The whole province has to come together and just say, when there's an outbreak, this is exactly what to do to contain it. I think that is the only way. But we are very, very close. We have very, very few cases compared to the other countries that are endemic for malaria. We are very, very close. We are working with the other countries, but yeah, it's once again politics, lack of resources. That's what's kind of hindering. I don't think it's technology that's hindering it. I do think it's on the control side. But we are getting close. I think they've moved a deadline, but we are so close to eliminating malaria. I do think in our lifetime it is possible for it to be a disease that's fully eliminated in South Africa and in some other countries.
Thank you so much, Chia. We've covered quite a lot of content today. So for anyone who is a little bit more curious, who has got a question that they would like to pose to Chia, you are more than welcome to submit it on our socials, on our website. We're going to make that platform available for you like we do with every episode. And what we will do is at a later stage in all our episodes, we will have a little bit of a question and answer session for anything that was unclear, any contributions that anyone would like to make. We will make that available for you. I would also just like to close off by congratulating you, Chia, on presenting at the second Women in Malaria conference, which is a very big deal for anyone who wants to know. Chia is really doing some wonderful work out there. And please, we would really like you to collaborate with her if you do want to ask her anything. She knows her stuff. So please do interact with us.
Thank you so much for having me.